Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Christensen and welcome to a collaboration between Thriving People and You Collective. We're really happy to be here today to be sharing some stories around what it means to be a senior leader. So we're talking today about women in leadership. Before we kick off, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm sitting here in very hot Adelaide in Australia. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm sitting on the land of the Kaurna people. And I just wanted to acknowledge their cultural heritage and their connection to land, sea, and community. And I also wanted to acknowledge elders, both past, present, and future. And I'm also really excited about the Uluru Statement from the Heart that's taking place within Australia too. So that's me. I'm here in sweaty Adelaide. It was 41 degrees today, so it was a stinker. A little bit about me before I go to Zara and Paul to do an introduction. But I'm the founder and director of Thriving People Consulting. So I'm one of those people that have lots of slashes against my name. So I am an executive coach, a management consultant, leadership consultant, and a keynote speaker. And in my previous life, I was an executive and senior leader. So today I'll be sharing some of my own lived experiences from having worked in the UK, Europe, Australia, and with a lot of global clients as well. So I'll leave it there from me. And let's go to maybe you, Zara. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, hello everyone. So I'm in the UK, not nearly as hot and sweaty for me today this morning. And I just wanted to say, I'm really excited to have this conversation. So I spend a lot of time with leaders on their beliefs and their mindsets that are either supporting or hindering them in their leadership effectiveness, and ultimately working with them and their teams to create more kind of positive cultural impact. So really excited to have a conversation with you both today. I'm also a business psychologist. I'm an executive coach and a creative director at leadership and culture change consultancy called You Collective. That's it from me. Paul, over to you.
Awesome. So hi everybody, Dr. Paul Brewerton, Chartered Occupational Psychologist, Doctor of Organisational Psychology and Strategic Director at You Collective. And I'm here today really to chair the conversation rather than to centre any of it on myself, because this is a conversation around women in leadership. Massively important topic. I do want to say a couple of words maybe at the end about effective male allyship. But other than that, I'm here to listen. I'm here to be curious, and I'm here to really pose the questions and just, let you guys take the space, take the platform, go with the conversation. So that's all I'm going to say about me today.
Brilliant. It's so great for the three of us to connect. And for context, I should share that I'm also a hashtag psychology nerd too. So we all are, when we're talking about our experiences today, we will have that psychology lens in the way that we're sharing our stories. And we all met whilst I was living in London. So many years ago, I went back to live in the UK because I do have English roots. And so that's how we all met over 10 years ago now. So it's been a while. Okay. So the topic women in leadership, gosh, it's such a big one, isn't it? And, we are not naive at all to think that we're going to cover everything today and be able to solve some of the challenges in this space. And I just think there are so many subgroups to this topic that we just can't cover. So we wanted to acknowledge that within, the Women in Leadership group, there are so many different subgroups where people have different cultural backgrounds, personality, sexual orientation differences, education, generational differences. I mean, you listed, there are so many different traits that women or people who identify as women have in leadership roles. And some of these traits or backgrounds that we hold may hold us to have a little bit more advantage, or may have contribute to our disadvantage as well in this collective group. So we are definitely not sharing our experiences and saying that we're representing all women in leadership. So from my experience, I'm sharing my experiences, as a white woman of privilege who is educated, who is a geriatric millennial. I just make the cut to be a millennial. Zara, did you want to?
Well, yeah, I'm with you on being a geriatric millennial. Thanks for adding that name to the conversation today. And also recognizing privilege, but I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective, being a woman of color as well.
Yeah, great. Brilliant. And so I guess the purpose for us, when Zara and we were talking about what we wanted to achieve from today, it was really to be able to share stories to normalize some of our experiences. And we acknowledge that our experiences are not held by, I said, all women in leadership roles. But I think, and we think, that there's power in sharing stories to normalize this, to help people feel braver to share their own stories, because storytelling is a really powerful way in helping increase curiosity, understanding from other people that then supports change. And so, yeah, we'll be sharing our experiences, but also sharing some strategies, because, you know, Zara and I coach a lot of senior people. We both coach a lot of women. And so we'd like to really help people out as well by sharing what's worked for us. Might not work for you, but, you know, we will be sharing that too. I just wanted to add as well that sometimes when we're sharing experiences, again, it really helps others. But, you know, if we've gone through traumatic events ourselves, then sometimes it's a bit hard to relive those, you know, some of those situations too. So I think when we're hearing people tell their stories, being able to acknowledge that it's helpful, but it can be tiring and, you know, a little bit can be emotional at times, I think, as well, for us to relive some of these experiences. And for me, there's sometimes been a bit of shame as well around some of the behaviors I may have tolerated or those experiences. And so I think what we want to do is to try and remove a lot of that shame, because we want to normalize these experiences to enact change and energy from other people. And I think the one thing that we're also really clear about today is just about that, you know, the problem is not with women. And, you know, we're all quite firm on that. It's not about trying to fix women, but trying to fix the systems that really don't support us in leadership positions. And Zara, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I totally agree. And I'd just say, I think through this conversation, we're kind of going to recognize that it's an and it's recognizing it's not fixing women and looking at the system, as well as and with our, you know, with the background as psychologists and exec coaches, what do we do to enable individuals and women to feel like they can navigate some of the challenges that they're facing. So yes, I think the conversation is broad, but I think also in our experiences and the stories that we can share is around some of the strategies that we and conversations that we have with our clients.
Yeah, great. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think because we work across lots of sectors as well, I think we just also want to acknowledge that some sectors are doing really well, you know, and are really ahead of the curve. And we're seeing a lot of cultural change, you know, much higher levels of representation of women, and other sectors are really behind, you know. Some are acting like they're still in the 80s, you know. So I think there's just this really broad level of the pace of change that's taking place. So again, we're not speaking for one sector individually. I think there's quite a lot of difference there. Yeah. Okay. Was there anything else either of you two wanted to add before we kind of kick off?
I just wanted to highlight that piece that you were saying around like recognizing that we can all hold on to a bit of shame around our experiences when uncovering and unpicking the conversation around women in leadership, what our beliefs are around that. I think it's a really great point to bring up, and also recognizing that it's work for everyone to recognize that there's some learning to come from those moments of discomfort. So it's recognizing actually that's where you start to unravel and uncover and learn something either about yourself or about your experience of others or about your stereotypes around certain groups or communities, and that actually that's where you need to go. And as you say, rightly so, appreciating that it's not about forcing people into those moments, and it can be exhausting and painful, and the space needs to be kind of safe to enable people to dig into those parts of themselves to start the learning.
Yeah. Thank you. I think when you've had lots of challenging experiences, a level of healing that needs to take place inside of you to feel safe enough to be able to share. Cool. Okay.
Do you want me to take the chair, I guess, and just ask a couple of questions? Yeah, I'm very conscious, given what you two have just shared and what you've said, that in me as a man asking the questions of you two as women around sharing your experiences, you've already positioned it that you're happy to share. You feel it's important to explore, share, normalize, but there is a risk that it's slightly perpetuating the dynamic of, like the man asks the women, well, tell me about all your experiences, and that sometimes might be okay, but it also may not be. And as a man, I'm just conscious of that. So thank you for saying, you're prepared to share. I am very conscious of, my role here and my gender here. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question, which is not so much about stories, although, feel free to share some, if you want to at this stage, but it's, what do you see as the key challenges facing women in leadership today?
Yeah. So thanks, Paul, and thanks for calling that out. I really appreciate you saying that, but also we really love having these conversations as a group, and so really appreciate your role in this today. So thank you. So just what I thought I would share, I guess, kind of in preparation for this conversation with you guys, I was looking through all of the conversations and clients I had who identify as women, to think about the sorts of themes that I've noticed in those conversations and discussions. And the one that was kind of like the biggie, and there's a few that I wanted to share, but I won't go on too much, and it'd be great to hear from your perspective too, Beck, was noticing that one of the challenges is finding a way to show up in an authentic way that also feels appreciated by the culture that and the teams that they're in. So recognizing that they feel like they're the only in the room. And I know, Beck, you were saying, there's a lot of change, there's a lot more senior women in leadership positions. And yet still, when you're looking at the C-suite and executive tables, a lot of the individuals I'm coaching, not exclusively, and honestly, I'm working with a lot more diverse groups of exec teams at the moment, but a lot of the women I have coached in the past recognize that they're the only one in the room. But not only that, but they feel that their views and opinions are countercultural. They feel like they're bringing a diverse or divergent voice, and don't necessarily have the confidence that that voice is the right one for the room. They don't necessarily feel like they're landing in the right way. And something else which I'm starting to notice as well in conversations is this piece around the competent versus likable dynamic. So how do I make sure I get my voice heard in a way that doesn't feel like I'm being overly aggressive or overly firm, or that, it's just that person going on about that topic again, and not just sitting back. And that balance between feeling like they're bringing value and also connecting in with their true selves. I think that's something that's definitely coming up as a big theme in my clients at the moment, for sure. And yeah, I might just pause there and just see, Beck,
I think
recognizing.
Yeah, I think that resonates with a lot of the senior women I'm coaching as well. Absolutely. So I think that they notice their difference. So when you get to the top, like you said, at the C-suite, and when you're looking at boards, the representation is not great from a gender equity perspective, and so they feel different. And I know even from my own experiences, sometimes that difference is continually pointed out as well.
Yeah.
So in the way language is used, or, this is what so-and-so thinks again. This is so-and-so mentioning this point again. So this almost like for some of the women I'm coaching now, this overt disrespect for having a diverse view, which then perpetuates this self-doubt, which then leads to a lot of self-censoring and a lot of internalizing of, what value do I add, a lot of self-doubt, which then, a lot of words and thoughts and opinions just don't get shared. So we're really missing the value that they bring. And, it's a lot of it is impacted by how others see and behave towards them. Because I think that's one of the main challenges for women, that the way we see ourselves is impacted by the way that other people behave towards us. And then that perpetuates how the system behaves. And those two factors influence how we see ourselves. And sometimes we're led to believe that it starts with us. And I'm not making excuses for us, maybe women holding unhelpful ways of thinking.
Yeah.
But what happens outside of us, where like we have this high antenna that is so sensitive to noticing. Because we're different, we want to fit in. And I think that need to fit in then leads to people-pleasing behaviors. And that's something that I'm also have been working on with quite a few of my clients, is this need to be liked. Don't want to be seen as too difficult or too aggressive. Yeah. Did you want to add to those labels that we get given sometimes?
Yeah, exactly. And I just think it's a really important point around how the senior leaders are showing up, senior women are showing up versus their kind of counterparts in the room. And something that I'm finding as well, when you're looking at, 360 feedback, the sort of language from their peers around what the expectation of their behaviors are, you notice that there's a real challenge in the system around, I guess the language is more about, speak up more, share more of your opinions. We know you've got great things to share, but actually with that comes a curiosity. What is it in this room that's making that person not feel like they can share? What is the culture in this team that is allowing more voices or silencing some voices? So that point that you make, I really noticed it, and particularly, and then the risk is you give that person that feedback and say, oh, this is what your peers are saying around your impact, and it's very one-sided, and it's very actually risky to share that perspective, because there has to be a perspective taken around the culture created in that team for psychological safety.
Absolutely. And if we reference systems theory more broadly, every individual is not an island. It acts as a part of a system, and the team is a system, the organization's a system. So we as a woman, as a female leader, we don't operate by ourselves. We're highly influenced by others. So I know I've had a few clients recently as well who get that feedback, and then there's a level of frustration. About the feedback. Well, I do speak up, and when I do, I get laughed at or criticized or demeaned, and so you're telling me to do this, but when I do, there's no curiosity to have a different view, and what they're seeing is a lot of groupthink. So when you don't have a diversity at the top table, you have people who have had the same experiences and think the same way, and so that groupthink plays out. And from my experience, I've sat in senior meetings and just thought, people don't even realize. They just think, oh, this is great. We all think the same way, and we're really easy to work with. She's difficult because she thinks differently, and so she's hard. So we're just going to talk about the topic, and we're going to solve it really quickly. And there's this lack of awareness that maybe we're missing something.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is such an interesting point when you then go to team dynamics. And I go slightly off point, I will come back. But when you're looking at teams and transition and how teams grow, and that teams need to get into conflict, and they need to understand how to have healthy conflict and healthy debate, but that maybe teams who are less diverse recognize themselves as being perhaps further along their team development journey because they're all in agreement with each other's views. Question mark. Are we all in agreement with each other's views because we've gone through this friction of disagreeing and recognizing and appreciating different voices, or are we all in agreement because actually we all have a very similar experience? Just a really interesting point that just made me think there.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point, because I think that the more challenging the interactions are with peers, that really interacts and impacts how women, for me, like how I would see myself as a female leader and how I would show up and contribute. And so then I would see myself sitting on the fence, self-censoring, and then being a bit of a chameleon at times, again, kind of going into that people-pleasing mode, and then just getting frustrated. So then for me, I would sometimes then be quite blunt. It's like then you kind of hold in all these views about something, and then it kind of comes out because you just think, well, I can't not say this anymore. So and then there's this, oh no, they're going to think I'm difficult now, because I'm coming across. But the emotional, I guess, tension that being silenced feels is hard to process. I found it really hard to process at times.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And interesting how does it come out for different people? What does the impact of that silencing or feeling othered or feeling like the only in the room or feeling like, oh, not that voice again? What is the impact? And often that's what we see. That's when our clients come to us is when that's not working for them anymore for various reasons, for their mental health or for their sense of self or for their confidence or whatever it might be, is recognizing this being in this system is having an impact. And it's really important to start unpicking how you can find your voice, because that's ultimately, in these examples we're talking about is where it's at, isn't it?
Yes. And I think the point you made about your authentic voice, because sometimes, I see a lot of women, being a chameleon and trying to fit in, and then you almost lose sense of who you are because you've operated in a particular system for so long.
Yeah.
So this question of who am I as a leader sounds, what values do I bring? They sound like really simple questions, but often I find women can lose sight of that because they've ended up adapting their behavior to function in a dysfunctional, often, environment.
Yeah.
And they always need to find themselves again and go back to this root cause of who they really are, but they often don't know that themselves. So I don't know whether you had clients go through that as well.
Yeah, I mean, personally, yes, I've done all of that. Like, just one of the reasons we set up You Collective, like, have a space to have more authentic leaders and support more authentic leaders, but for me to test that out for myself as well. But definitely in terms of my clients, like, doing a lot of work around values to understand that that's their guide, their base point, their the thing that roots them to who they are and the decisions that they make, and how aligned to those are they, and how misaligned are they. And often, sometimes conversations are around this culture. I don't have the energy to be in this culture anymore. I was coaching somebody in an agency last year who was not just countercultural because they were the only on the executive team, but also from a personality perspective were seen as more introverted than extroverted, and just didn't see that their personality preference was valued in that organization. So there were layers for that individual around, not only am I struggling in one group, in one room, but also I'm feeling like this culture isn't aligned to who I am and what I think is important. And it was a values-based decision that enabled that person to make a change where they could self-select out and then select into a culture that felt more appreciative of diverse voices, not just from a female perspective, but also a personality perspective.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's a great example then how some organizations end up, perpetuating their challenge because the system isn't set up to support diverse voices. And then when people self-select out for their own mental health or their own well-being, so they're in a place where they feel safer, then the organization's left with, oh, they weren't a good cultural fit. So let's find a good cultural fit is often a phrase for let's just find someone else like us. And so that further perpetuates the issue for that executive team or that organization. We tried diverse and it didn't work. So let's just go for what we know.
Yeah, which is another, I guess, point around the value of values from an organizational perspective. So instead of having culture fit as the guide, or this like, oh, it wasn't the right fit, if you've done the work on the culture or the organizational values and making sure that you're making those decisions in that way, you can look to avoid those challenges, because it's people who are aligned to the values as opposed to this unknown culture fit, which is they don't think like us. Yes. Be more of a guiding anyway.
Yes, yeah. Yes, no, that's a good point. Well, maybe Paul will pause there for we'll pause there. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it was really interesting listening to that flow, because I was I suppose hoping and anticipating that at some point, because it started off being very centered on women's experience and what women can do, or the challenges that women are facing, women in leadership are facing, that they need to overcome, that's kind of within them. you know, and so making better choices that are more individual, values based, etc., and kind of speaking out. But actually, you talked about it, you hinted at it, you've gone into it to some extent. But this idea of the system within organizations, the cultures within organizations being that's such a fundamental part of, as I see it, the challenges that women face. If the culture isn't set up, if the values aren't there to support diverse voices, you know, like those headwinds are really strong for women, like to the point where they're exhausting.
No.
So I think there's a lot to say, and some acknowledgement, significant acknowledgement from organizations needed, that a lot of the work is with them, you know, is to really look long and hard at the culture, and you know, make efforts, you know, to change that, to change the values, to change the mindsets, the behavior, the ways of thinking. That has to be right the way through the fabric of the organization, and that needs real honesty, you know, in order to come to pass. So I'm gonna thank you. That was amazing, just listening to that. Sorry, Zara, you wanted to.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that, from an organizational perspective, I'm not sure if you guys like this. There was a Harvard Business Review article that just became so popular, so overly shared in a really good way, that came out in 2021, which was saying, stop telling women they've got imposter syndrome. I don't know if you guys have read it, but essentially, you know, one of the challenges I could have shared, and it's legitimate as well, is that the coachees that I work with would say that they have imposter syndrome. And what this article shares is around, you know, stop telling women they've got imposter syndrome. To that point that you were just reflecting back to us, Paul, was it's not about just saying that they've got imposter syndrome, but it's this curiosity around where's it from? Why does this exist? Why do women have imposter syndrome? And it's this, through this conversation, it's the system at work that exacerbates this for women. So it's not about fixing women, it is about fixing the system. But as I said, it is an and, because there's some empowerment that women can understand this particular system is less beneficial for me, or actually I want to try to change this system, wherever they're at in their resourcefulness and their energy for that, and on their, you know, career path and their journey. Everyone's in a different place, right? Some people might be ready to create more waves in organizations. Other people might feel like they want to find a space that they fit in and they can truly reach their potential. But it was such a great challenge around this notion of imposter syndrome, and it's something that I like to bring to my clients to help give them balance and perspective. Is I hear you saying that you've got imposter syndrome, and there is a system in play that perhaps is perpetuating that, as well as what are some strategies we can do to work with some of the self-limiting beliefs and voices and perspectives and mindsets that you're sharing with yourself that could be rewired, reframed to be more useful and beneficial, to give you the resources to make the right decisions for you. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, Beck.
No, I was just going to say that I think looking at, you know, if we, you know, talk about cognitive behavioral theory and looking at the link between our thinking and our behaviors, and really being able to unpick what are some of those dysfunctional ways of thinking or unhelpful ways that just don't serve us. You know, there are 10 common thinking errors, and we won't talk about them today, but, you know, everyone has a couple that are almost like their go-to. They're unhelpful patterns that they just fall back into, and they're often triggered by particular situations. So the work we do with coaches, because we have psychology backgrounds, is we can help people unpick that. So what are those particular triggers, situations? What is it bringing up for you? How do you process those emotions? And what, you know, is it reminding you of experience in another job? You know, where perhaps you haven't processed some of those experiences, and how can you reframe and see this as an opportunity to, you know, to think differently and to alter your behavior as well. Because I think what I notice the most is, because senior women are very stressed, most senior people are very stressed, they just get locked into autopilot. Yeah. And they just get into just consistent ways of behaving, and they don't often have enough space or find the space to reflect from their experiences, to pause, to focus on their well-being, And so, we just get locked like we're on a roundabout. We're spinning and we can't quite get off. Sometimes that's how I felt when I was an exec. Like I couldn't like stop it just to pause and give myself a moment, to breathe and to reflect. So I think the value of coaching is that we can help people pause and dig a bit deeper.
It's great, thank you. If I might, I'd like to move on to the next question.
Polite, Paul. Polite.
Yeah, okay then. Right, we're going to move on to the next question now. Now I tell you. So this is the one that I really appreciate you being prepared to share, because it is kind of personal stories, and so far we've been talking about a little bit individual experiences, but more as providers of coaching or providers of organizational consulting. This is more, your personal stories around biggest challenges. So I just want to ask that question. I don't mind who wants to go first, or maybe you kind of go one after the other, and you maybe share a couple of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome at work as women in leadership. Who would like
Sarah,
to
you go first. You go first if you like.
Yeah, okay. So, well, for me, it's been a journey. It's been a journey. Is being, I think, Bet, you mentioned this previously, but for me, it was being a people pleaser, and always playing this likable, smiley role. And actually, as I started to unpick it and uncover what was happening, and for me realizing I've got values around humility and also optimism, so it's like, oh, don't worry, don't shine too bright, let enable other people to shine, and also it'll be fine, that kind of magic combination of values. Yes, they are my values, but actually they weren't working for me in my early career, which actually, and also not kind of speaking up, seeing things that felt like that doesn't sit right, and living and having microaggressions on a daily basis, like, oh, can I touch your hair, or oh, you speak really well, where were you educated, these perceptions which you wouldn't necessarily say and wasn't being said to my white female counterparts, for example, or like actually just having a good old scrunch of the hair, but recognizing that was a daily occurrence, which I accepted, and recognizing that I was still being this smiley, likable, do what the senior leaders wanted as I progressed through my career, and realized that actually that kind of led to a moment of burnout for me, because I was just taking on so much work. I was just saying yes to everything, and I think a lot of people can kind of relate to moments like that in their careers, and I definitely have a lot of coachees who experience that. And often what I find, and what I found for myself and the work that I've done, is recognizing that I was really disconnected with me in those moments. Like, it was for other people as opposed to for me. And the work is around, if you're people pleasing, yes, you can go into the psychology of like, where does that come from? And I've done that work too, but we don't have enough time to go into that. Like, where does that come from? Well, my childhood, but it all does. But apart from that, it's recognizing, yes, I understand that I've got these qualities, but it's not serving me now. So how do I unpick that? How do I create space and boundaries for myself, as well as feel like I can be more me, which is why I'm just so passionate about, enabling people to have conversations around their strengths. We'll get into that later, like understanding what makes you you, when are you at your best, not within a constrained environment. And also why we kind of set up You Collective was this mad passion to help people not feel that they have to get into this place of people pleasing, being outside of themselves, overcommitting, taking on too much, getting to burnout. Because ultimately you're getting to burnout because you're doing something that you don't love, that's not connected with you. Whereas if you're working really hard for something you love, that's called passion, or that's called whatever it is. So yeah, I'd say for me it was that was the biggest kind of like realization around this likable, smiley And I definitely found, like, I'm definitely still smiling, I'm definitely still energetic, but I can be very direct and challenging in a really caring way. And I found that that came out through this reflective moment, and this kind of burnout was like, no, this isn't me. How can I find more of me and call out, honestly, call out with care when I'm seeing microaggressions, not just to me, but also to people around me, and being very confident now to have those conversations. Initially, also it was around like sexist comments that were happening when I was coming up in, you know, the leadership roles in organizations, and letting those slide and even laughing along. Oh my God, like, ha, ha. And you know, we spoke about shame at the beginning, and definitely reflecting back on that, how the hell did I let that stuff slide? And definitely feeling confident now and appreciate there's privilege with that. I have a role, I have you know, a level of seniority and experience, that I have a level of privilege that I am able to now have a space to call out those things, and hopefully support and empower more people to do that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing that, and there's so much there. Really appreciate the vulnerability that you know, that place that you've gone to with that, because I think that's really important to hear. And I kind of wanted to go to, how did you make that transition? How did you know, start to call out those things from that kind of tough love perspective? As just, I don't know, it's kind of my thought on that, you know, like from a place of appreciation and compassion, but to actually call out those things that are happening that you don't feel comfortable with, you know, like what strength were you able to call on, or what changed, what shifted to enable that?
So it's definitely like work in progress, right? You know, I'm still learning. I still have moments where I'm like shocked by certain comments, and I'm not on the front foot, I'm on the back foot. But I know that I then go back and say, actually, can we have a conversation around that, if I wasn't able to say it in the moment? But in terms of the shift, it was really this feeling, and I am a very feelingy person. It was, and I'm very proud of it. But it was this feeling that I wasn't doing myself any service. I was doing myself a disservice by not speaking up and being smiley. I felt a bit inauthentic, and I wanted to be more real. I was real in certain spaces, and I wanted to find more opportunity to have more real conversations in a professional way, of course. And it's not bringing your whole self to work, it's bringing an appropriate self to work. But for me, it was that shift, and ultimately that burnout moment, which was, this isn't working for me, and I don't want anyone to feel like they have to get to a sense of burnout. But it was a real wake up for me. You are exhausted. You can't stop crying in your Shavasana practice in yoga. Something's happening. Let's look into it. Why are you crying in the most relaxing pose in yoga? And that for me was the wake up. Like, let's not do that again. Let's not do that for Zara, and let's find a way that we can challenge more of these things and eke out, you know, it's progress, like eke out more of you, and ultimately like feel like I'm in a place where I'm able to do that for other people now.
Yeah, thank you. Beck.
Well, I think I can relate to the people pleasing aspect too. I think that's has been one of my greatest challenges. But I feel like partly where that has come from is, you know, partly I was raised to be a good girl, you know, to be nice and to be liked. So I think often a lot of, you know, women have had that experience as they're growing up. But also I experienced a lot of microaggressions at work too. And I was in some very senior roles quite young, in my 30s. And I also have the privilege or not of not having many wrinkles then and looking quite young. So I almost looked even younger than what I was, and I was young in senior roles. So my challenge was, you know, I had a lot of like sexual harassment behavior, so really inappropriate behaviors towards me. You know, I've been bullied as well by peers, by people in my team. So the bullying has come up, it's kind of come across. So and there are a lot of like really small behaviors. And I think I, like you, Zara, I used to pride myself on being resilient. So for a long time, I was like, yeah, I'm tough. I can cope in these big roles. And you almost want to diminish that you're different than everyone else and you want to fit in. And the fitting in is kind of where my people pleasing tendency was like dialed up really high, is because of these behaviors. I didn't want to call them out because I didn't want to point out to people that I was different and these behaviors weren't acceptable. So I put up with lots of very uncool behaviors and tried to be a bit like a chameleon, so I would fit in with the environment that I was operating in. And I think for me, it got to a point where I was working for one organization which really wasn't a good fit for me at all, and where I was being yelled at and, like some really poor behaviors from peers. And that was deemed as an acceptable way to talk to a peer to get them to do what, someone else wanted you to do. I think for me, that was a really big wake-up call, just to say, I know I don't deserve these behaviors, and yet I've been tolerating all of this. And then I've seen around me, as I've led bigger teams, a lot of particularly younger women, just calling out really poor behaviors. And I think younger millennials and Gen Zs are fantastic at being really brave and courageous and calling out behaviors. And what people were starting to call out, I would be thinking, but I used to put up with that for years. And so for me, some of the people pleasing would originate from this like shame of accepting these poor behaviors, because now I wouldn't tolerate any of them at all. But when I was in the space of that, the people pleasing is so you end up being able to not be noticed, not to stand out, and then feel like you have to prove yourself. So often, because I was quite young in roles, I would have people comment on my age, like, how did you get this job? How old are you? Like, where, what did you do before this? And so for me, the people pleasing came from also this need to prove myself, because people overtly were questioning why I might be there at times. And often I would win roles over someone who had been in the team who was maybe 10, 15, 20 years older than me. So this need to prove myself became a really strong motivator. And if you combine that with what I would call my kind of high functioning anxiety at the time, this propensity to push myself, push, and, again, to burn out. And for me, part of it got to me having breast cancer as well, when I was 38, so it was 5 years ago, to really help me start looking at, who do I want to be at work? What sort of environment do I want to show up in? And what sort of behaviors do I want to tolerate? But I see this not feeling good enough really fueled me for a long time, and I guess for me, what I've had to work on is building a strong sense of self internally that isn't driven by external validation. And I've had to accept that I am not for everyone. So I'm like you, Zara, I'm pretty high energy. I'm a positive person, but I will challenge at times. And for me, I am not for everyone is something that I've really come to accept now. My granny would say, Becca, you're not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay, So some vital acceptance of that, and then knowing who you are, and then being able to set boundaries. So whether it's giving feedback to people, like you said, Zara, whether it's capping how much work we're willing to do, it's letting go of the need to prove yourself. And a lot of the women I work with now, particularly, it's about building a stronger sense of self that is separate from others. And yes, you can have a great people around you that support you, but ultimately you need to believe that yourself. And I think for me, that's a work in progress, but it's been a journey to get to where I am today.
Thank you. That's a lot, right, from each of you, and thank you, Beck, as well for sharing that, and for just putting those stories and yourself out there in that way. I'm conscious, we as we continue the conversation, there's a lot more we could talk about. I just want to ask you, do you want to, because you've already been talking about how people can overcome some of these challenges, because you've talked about how you have overcome these challenges, but I want to just know from you, like, where do you want to take it? Because we don't have hours of time remaining, so we could, but we probably shouldn't. So do you want to, are there more challenges you want to share, or should we move on to kind of summarizing or top tips on how to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, I think I agree. Let's get into some strategies. Like, this is the stuff that we're facing. Let's get into some of those strategies. And just thanks for sharing those stories too. And I resonate so much with so many of those things that you say, and we could talk for ages on recognizing that and the journey that we've been on, but appreciate time. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So shall I
What do
move
we
on
do
to that?
about it?
Is that okay?
It's the thing.
So,
What should we do?
yeah, that's it. That's the question, right? So how can women overcome the challenges? You know, what are your tips from your own experience or from what you've learned from others, what you've observed, all of that? You know, what do you think women can do to overcome the challenges you've talked about? Beck, do you want to go first, or Zara?
Yeah, I can go first. I think it's really important to take the time to really get to know yourself and to increase your self-awareness. And self-awareness is something that's used a lot, but really it's understanding your cognitive and behavioral tendencies, and understanding what presses your buttons at work, where that might come from. I'm a big advocate for therapy. So as well, I think therapy can support coaching as well. So I think understanding, what some of our unhelpful thinking patterns, where they might come from around what does it mean to be a leader or maybe a woman in your family, and how does that impact how you're showing up. I think that's sometimes relevant for some people to do, but really getting to be clear on what are my triggers at work, what presses my buttons, what unhelpful thinking patterns and do I have, how do I behave, and how can I start modifying some of that, and doing a lot of like really small micro changes in your behavior and thinking. I think investing the time in a coach or just being able to reflect more frequently on your experiences to start looking at patterns is so important.
Thank you.
I love it. And for me, it's the key is in those repeat patterns. What keeps showing up when you go from role to role? What are the things that keep kind of batting you back? Those are messages, right? Those are messages saying that actually there could be an opportunity to make a little mini experiment, micro shift in those things. Love it. The one I'd say, and something that I'm work really hard on myself, and by no means am I there, but it's something that I'm really passionate about, is dreaming big for other women. So helping them to see their superpowers, what they can achieve, but also asking yourself questions like, how am I supporting other women right now, and is there diversity in that group as well, and could I do more to support the women in my network? So questions around I think taking it back to like just a personal example, that just very quickly, one of the things I was thinking about for shame for me was recognizing and aligning with your story, Beck, was not wanting to be seen as different, wanting to be seen as the group. And so with that is, well, actually, I'm not one of those women who are being overly vocal, or and for me that's there's a lot of shame around how I experienced that, thinking back to my experiences there, and how women can actually recognize that it's about community and it's supporting everyone, as opposed to there's only one role for the woman at the top, so fight against other women. So I would say it's dreaming big for other women and making sure that there's space for you to support them, and people in your network, and making sure it's diverse as well.
Yeah, just to build on that point, I think that's so important. And if I think about my own experiences, where I feel like everyone around me at school and then university and then in my first few jobs, people were able to dream big for me, and they would tell me, you have the potential to do this, or I think you could do this. And they were always dreaming bigger than what I could see myself with. And I feel like when you have that around you, even if it's just one voice, then it propels you to think a little bit bigger than what you perhaps were thinking yourself. And you start believing that because you're hearing it from other people. And although we need to believe that ourselves, I think when we're early in our career, we're still getting to know ourselves and what's possible in the working world. So I can think of like the unofficial mentoring that I would have got over the years was just phenomenal to help me dream much bigger than what I thought I could ever do. Yeah,
brilliant.
Super cool.
Thank you. That's great. I want to ask another question, right? So we've been talking a lot about personal experiences and personal kind of strategies as well around overcoming the challenges that face women in leadership and women in organizations generally today. I want to pose the question I was kind of hinting at earlier, which is, what do you feel organizations can do to overcome these challenges? You know, we've talked a lot about what women can do themselves, individually, personally, collectively. What about organizations? What can they do? What should they do? Who wants to go first?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I think if I can think about organizations that I see doing it really well at the moment. So over here in Australia, I think government generally is really leading the way from a gender equity perspective. And I think there are a few areas that they do well. I've been an executive in government, and I've never worked with so many smart women. And I remember in my first month, I'd moved from working in multiple male-dominated sectors in the private sector before, and moved into an exec role in government. And for the first month, I'd look around the room and it was literally like 50-50. I've never sat at the table with so many senior women. And I was kind of, intrigued to know how they got here and why. And when I'm talking to people, and I've realized that the thing that government does great over here is it recognizes leaders as humans who have a life outside of work. And it's not seen as a weakness to pick the kids up or to have this caring responsibility or to do this, and so I feel like people, both men and women, were respected that there's stuff you need to do outside of work, and that's fine. And we won't think you're less committed if you need to do that. As long as you still deliver what you need to, we are less concerned about the hours that you work and how that work spreads across the day. So I think having, a lot of hybrid or flexible working policies, and through COVID, we've seen organizations become more flexible in the way that they think about how work can get done as we move towards the future of work. But I think that really helps, and men should be supported as well to co-parent or to have those, to share those family responsibilities too. There shouldn't be that guilt there too. So I think that goes both ways. I think targets have really helped as well. I know people have mixed views about that, but and having really inclusive recruitment processes, as well, where there's, gender equity on the panel, and, there's a diverse range of questions, and that constant questioning about, we need to represent the community. And I guess in government, that mandate's much clearer. Like, who are we serving? We're serving the community. Well, the community, half of it is, people that identify as women. And so it's this acknowledgement that our customer base should be represented in our senior leadership team. And it's they're absolute advocates for that. And that's a part of the culture. So the culture is really strong in that space too. So
that's great. Thank you. Brilliant to have that example. And, I'm sure there are plenty of other examples out there of, organizations that are leading the way, as well as many examples where they're not. But I think that was really helpful, just as a kind of, just a really good example of what good looks like. So thank you, Beck. Zara, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I guess just to add, when you're looking at trends and themes for this year, and it's tech, it's hybrid, it's DE&I, but it's interesting that these are trends, but how are they getting knitted into the cultural structures of organizations? Because that's when you're able to change the systems, is when you're not just having a women in leadership program for women, or a DE&I training for certain groups, but actually it's knitted into the culture, it's the systems, it's the day-to-day interactions, it's everything. And I love that point around diversity on recruitment panels, and it goes down to kind of like the language and how we do things around here. So it really is the cultural piece in the structures of the organizations that people are working in. What is the language around the leadership competencies and behaviors? How kind of stereotypically male dominated is that language around, like, being aggressive or assertive or whatever, as opposed to appreciating more variety in what it is to be a leader, that it's not a stereotypical male stereotype of what a leader is, and just challenging that. And I think as a woman myself, I have to challenge that in myself, like, what is it to be a leader? Actually, it's really diverse, and it can be whatever you want it to be. But also when we're talking about unpicking those stereotypes, I think it's really important, and recognizing that it's not a one-off programs, it's the whole culture and how it filters through. So down to the language, down to how we do things on a day-to-day basis, and questioning that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Beck.
And I was going to say, I just think that we've talked a lot about some of the challenges, but I guess there are, we're seeing strengths, and we're seeing organizations do some of this really well too. And I think, if I think about even in the last 10 years, there's been a much bigger representation, increase. We're still not there where we need to be, but, Zara, you were saying that you're coaching a lot more just women in general than what you were 10 years ago too. So I just think that there has been some change. We are seeing this momentum. Is it happening quick enough? No, I don't think it is. We still have issues around, wage gaps. So, in particular sectors too, where there's not equal pay. And I also think that the shift in the definition of what great leadership looks like has gone from this old paradigm of command, control, the leader must have all the answers. So this kind of expert leadership position, like that shift is really helping us too. And I feel like when I do a lot of work with emerging leaders as well. And so when I look at some of the Gen Z behaviors and what we're seeing, it gives me a lot of hope, for the future, because I just think this is a generation who is really inclusive. They are very values focused. And they're really curious about understanding diverse experiences, and they call you out. I mean, I've run sessions where people get called out for using, disrespectful terms, and they kind of beat me to it. Like before I even need to, like they'll call out people in the room, and, I feel hope, but I feel like, I think, we need to keep on focusing. Our work is not done.
Oh man, it's beginning, right? I mean, thank you both. Is there anything more you wanna add? I was gonna say a couple of words on effective allyship and how that can help, because I think it speaks to this issue around organizations, right? You're talking about systems, patriarchal systems that have been in place for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and that's a lot to ask for women to single-handedly or collectively face into that and overturn that and shift the cultures themselves. Ultimately those patriarchal systems have been set up by men primarily, when you go back all those hundreds of years, and that still remains the case today to a large extent. There's that system, it's legacy, but it also is very much in existence still. So I think there's a lot of work that men need to face into. So I've got a few tips, and I did prepare something, so I might just check on that. And by the way, I'm not holding myself up here as any kind of, paragon, any kind of exemplar of what good looks like. It's always and forever a work in progress. And that's kind of the point. You've got to be open. You've got to be curious. You've got to be humble, as a man, even moving into this space. But a few tips around this, really based on advice, but observations as well. First thing, most important thing, is to stop with the defensiveness, right? So be open, be humble, be curious, listen to women's experiences, and accept that when you haven't been active in challenging structures and systems and people that marginalize women, you have been part of the system. That's really painful to accept, but it is the truth. That's a really important first step, and it is the first step. I think, secondly, I want to, advocate being active. So when you actually see and hear women's experiences, because you've actually truly listened and empathized, you can't unsee or unhear those experiences. And then it's doubly important to start to ally proactively in the workplace, challenge when you see a woman being talked over, apologize when you do it, look out for examples of unfairness towards women, and challenge them. I think that's my second point. Third is to be open, to be prepared to get it wrong, to be uncomfortable, and to learn and develop your own new perspectives or ways of thinking and acting when it comes to sexism in the workplace when you see it. But at the same time, tread carefully. Don't be mansplaining to women how to step into their power or centering the conversation on you. Respect the space and the context and the conversation. So, finally, I would say notice and act, but do it thoughtfully. Do it with care. Be considerate. Read the room, and continue to listen. Be open. Be humble. and continue to learn. So, I think there's a lot there, but I would advocate going there, right? It's not okay to be a bystander. You need to get involved if you're going to be an ally. So I'm very happy for you guys to kind of call out any nonsense that I just spoke, because that's the gig.
No, that's great, Paul. And actually, as you were going through that list, I was like, I need that list too. It's not just, it's everyone being allies to everyone, really. I think we all need to have that level of honest introspection, curiosity, and humble acknowledgement that we're going to get it wrong. And I think a lot of the time there's fear of getting it wrong, so people don't do it, or that's what creates bystander effect. I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to offend. But we have to, because that's how we learn. So let's get it wrong in a most respectful and caring way, and learn to be better allies generally.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Do you guys want to just kind of finish up? Have you got any kind of closing comments or things you want to shout out or call out?
I think if that's all right, if I jump in first, I just think that I would encourage other women to be more brave and to be able to, start sharing some of our experiences with peers. I think the more we can do that, the more we normalize our experiences, and also, I think sharing is power. So I think when we hold it all inside with shame or embarrassment or uncertainty, then, the experiences can end up having control over us. So I think I would just encourage people to share in trusted, safe places to help people realize it's not just you, because often women just think it's them and they feel really lonely at the top. So find that peer, find that network where you can be safe and evolve and start working through what you need to, as well as calling out the behaviors you're seeing around you, because, there's a lot of times we deserve a lot better.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah?
And I just echo that around connecting with more female mentors. I speak to so many people who just say they don't see people like them in their organization. Don't let that be a barrier. Go find them outside of your organization. Find people who are super inspiring, and also realize that you're super inspiring. So how can you maybe mentor people too? So recognizing the power that you hold, as well as finding and seeking out more connections of people that you find inspiring. And then also just really doing the work on values and boundaries. So align yourself to your values, and enable yourself to create boundaries for yourself and your mental health.
Awesome. Putting you both at significant risk of being inundated with requests for mentoring. I also, because that may happen now, you've said that, but I just wanted to ask you, what's the best way of getting in touch with you, right? So if people listening, watching today want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way of doing that? Either of you. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I could jump in. So I'd say reach out to me on LinkedIn. So Zara Bates on LinkedIn, or through the U Collective website, but probably LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thanks, Beck.
Yeah, same for me. So Rebecca Christensen on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Can I pass the baton back to you, Beck, because you opened the conversation today, just to kind of close it off? Is that okay?
Yes, of course. Well, I always love having conversations with you both. So thank you for being willing to hold the space. Thank you, Zara, for sharing your own stories. There's a lot of similarities in what we've gone through, and hopefully that again helps normalize the experiences for other women. And thank you, Paul, for being your usual humble and curious self. And we hope, to those of you listening, that you've taken something from today, and that you can go forth and share that insight with someone else around you, and keep learning and be curious. So thank you, everyone, and take care.